Right, so yesterday we talked about a psychology intro, and now I want to lay the foundation. So, this is basically what we will discuss throughout our psychology week here. It is all about finding cycles. So, what I mean by that, in technical analysis, in our technical trading, we also have cycles because we have PD array. And if we want to know an ST, then we have the PD array, we have displacement in, we have displacement out. If we want to know or conform our order flow, we have displacement into that ST, then we have a new displacement out, etc. We create an order flow lag. Those are cycles. And eventually that cycle leads to what? It leads to a trade ID. It leads to order flow being confirmed, high probability, low probability. It leads to a certain outcome. So you have a trigger and you have an outcome. It's a mechanical step constantly. It's a step-by-step thing, step-by-step process. It's the same with our psychology. We have a trigger and an outcome. And in between that trigger and the outcome, there's a lot of steps that we take to get to that outcome. So for example, before we start revenge trading, there can be a small trigger. The trigger can be as small as, well, a very obvious trigger could be we take a loss. And in between that, we also have very small steps before we actually revenge trade. So we don't take a loss and now we revenge trade. No, there's a lot of things going on in our mind before we actually revenge trade. That taking a loss might not actually be the trigger. The trigger might be even earlier. And now in this week, we want to identify the steps. We want to identify the cycles that leads us to doing something, messing up in our trading. For example, we move our stop loss. There's also a certain cycle that happens there. There's a certain cycle that we need to interrupt. And that is what we are mainly going to be touching on. So that is why I've also written down what made you happy and what made you not so happy. So for example, when I'm feeling great, there's a certain cycle that happened during the day. Usually I slept well, so my foundation, the basics were perfect. I slept well, I ate well, and just because I ate well and slept well, I'm already sort of proud of myself because I did that. And then afterwards, I work on my to-do list, I work on my trading. After I did that, and I feel very fulfilled, I feel happy. And of course, the opposite can also be what made you not so happy. It's also a cycle. So there's a trigger and there's an end. And the end is what made you not so happy. Well, maybe you didn't sleep that well. Maybe the food you ate wasn't that good. Maybe you spent too much time on social media and then eventually you didn't finish your to-do list that you had for today. And that in the end, you didn't feel fulfilled. You were not that proud of yourself. So you're not really happy. So that is again a cycle. And again, the happy, not so happy is not necessarily things you need to pay attention to. If you're struggling with it, of course, feel free to pay attention to it. But we're mainly going to pay attention to cycles in trading. Once we can recognize cycles in trading, believe me, you will see cycles everywhere in your life. So I would love for you to do today to get the basics right. So for example, how are you going to make sure that you feel happy every day? Might sound like a silly question, but how are you going to make sure you feel happy through your sleep, through your food, etc.? And then eventually, I would love for you to write down your cycles as well that you can currently think of. And again, a cycle starts off very vague because like I just mentioned, we lose and then we revenge trade. But when we pay attention to that cycle over and over and over, we will notice certain steps that leads us to that cycle. We just need to first identify the cycle that is happening. So that is why I used the general rule of thumb, happy, not so happy, because these are general cycles that we pay attention to already. Then the routine, which is very important. I would love for you to journal before you start trading or before you do anything, or even journal throughout the day. Even if you're not trading, just journal. Write down your thoughts on pen and paper. Just like a deep work session, you write it down, you just start. You just start writing. How are you feeling? What are you feeling? Why are you feeling that? What happened today? If you can just answer those simple questions, then you will write. Automatically, you will write everything that comes to mind, and there will be a lot of things that come to mind. That's exactly what we want to write down. And then eventually, because we do that, we notice certain cycles as well, which is very important. That is why eventually when you do start trading, you will know that if you journal before, during, and after your trading. So you don't need to journal a lot. Just quickly write something down if something comes into your mind. Perfect. Because then eventually we can look at that and we can see cycles where if we mess up, what happened before that? And what happened before that? that is why that routine is so important. So again, routine, mainly journaling, just finding out our cycles. That is very important. So this is something that we will touch on a lot in this week, cycles. And when we find that cycle, we want to, of course, interrupt that cycle. So we want to break the cycle. But first, it's acknowledging certain cycles. So that is exactly what we will work on as well eventually this week. All right, so that is essentially what I would love for you to do right now is touch on the cycles and just sort of discover yourself, discover your cycles, discover your basics. What is your time like? How are you feeling? How is your sleep? How is your food, etc. Just the very basics. And then we can find certain cycles in our life as well. So that is what I would love for you to do. And then eventually throughout this week, we will touch on it more in depth. Perfect. Thank you.